It's September 28th, 2023 today. Welcome to Axiom News Live, where every Thursday we engage strengths to catalyze change. Here we start with what's strong rather than what's wrong, and to lift up the stories of people whose work in the world we've become connected to and care about. I'm your host, Peter Pula. Today we will be joined by Lindsay Harris. Lindsay is with Propolis Cooperative Housing in Kamloops, British Columbia. They are leveraging community bonds to make what is important to them happen in their community. And also by Megan Lucero. Megan is at least one of the founders of Newsroom, and she'll be joining us from the west coast of the US of A. One of the reasons, or some of the reasons, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today is because, capitalism is a problem, but there are other ways to work with money in communitarian and community-based ways. And some of the work that Lindsay is doing with Propolis and with Tapestry Capital is shifting the way we work money and markets in our community and return community power back into our hands to make our dreams and aspirations come true. In the meantime, Megan and her work with People's Newsroom is building community power through their capacity to tell their own story. So we have these two questions around economy for a new commons and journalism for a new commons. And so I'm very much looking forward to what unfolds in hearing from both Lindsay and Megan. So with that, we'll invite Lindsay and Megan to join the stream. Welcome to both of you, Lindsay and Megan. Now, I did warn you that it might be fun to trace our relational lineage. So as we weave community and find ourselves traveling the paths of relationship, I think it's nice to say how it is that we became connected. So maybe we'll start with you, Lindsay. We've just met for the first time. How do you suppose that came to pass?
Well, it's been lovely to meet you for the first time this morning, Peter, and also to meet Megan today. I think that the connection for us was through Tapestry Community Capital, which is an organization that has been supporting our work at Propolis over the last several months. And there are some really fabulous folks over there who are kind of leading the way on the charge for community bonds across Canada. So we're really excited to be working with them, and it's led to this magical connection with you today.
Right on. Agreed. Thank you. And Megan, can you remember how it is that I think we've been crossing paths for 6 or 8 months now, and here we are?
Yeah, I think the human who connected us, I suppose, would be James Locke at Opus. Opus is an organization in Sheffield, a community and civic organization that had been connected to you for a long time, but mainly through your work through generative journalism. So I think your kind of work and workshop series and pulling that through has been spoken about, whispered in different groups that I'm in. So it was great to finally be connected. So yeah, I think there's obviously the people that connect us, but then there's obviously like when there's a certain subject or there's a certain longing that connects us of ideas, that's where I think the gravitational pull and the glue like cements it. So grateful for that.
That kind of leads a bit into another question I have, is why you said yes. Where do you suppose the common ground might be, Megan, if you could name it?
I think at the moment I'm very much drawn to like positive action towards a transformative future. So I think anyone who's imagining and dreaming of a different space, I think a lot of us are frustrated, but I think that frustration can end up becoming quite stagnant and quite unhealthy when it just sits as frustration of the world around us. And so I'm constantly drawn to and trying to help find people and organizations and things that help me go to that next space of turning it into action, turning it into hope, turning it into something that takes us outside of all of it. So very much drawn to you and this space and people who do that. So already, even just the introduction, even just getting to be introduced to Lindsay, it's already feels like a more hopeful, exciting space where things are happening, because they are already happening in so many places.
Beautiful. And I hosted for the first time in probably 4 years an on-land gathering in Brantford, Ontario. And Lindsay, I knew you were coming, and some of the kinds of things that you're working on were coming up in that space. And also, Megan, this frustration that seems to be bubbling under the surface for so many people at every level, from people who aren't able to access their rightly deserved social benefits and are living in squalor as a result, right up to leaders of nonprofits that are just struggling with the systems as they are, but yet there seems to be no sense of where to go other than those places. And so, Lindsay, the work that you're doing, it's, we hang around with Peter Block a little, and he says one of the few things we can change is what we pay attention to. And so this idea that we can pay attention to the kind of work that you're doing, Lindsay, and to Megan, cultivate the possibility in community for communities themselves to pay attention and tell the stories seems to be part of the job.
Yeah, right. I appreciate that so much, Peter, because I mean, we're really engaged in a very much on the ground project. We're trying to build something very, very tangible with our organization embedded in our community. But I think for me, the chance to talk with you today and also to connect with Megan and this idea of telling people's stories and getting the news of our story out more broadly, to have it inspire other people, but also for us, to learn from the people that are listening and that reach out to us, is so, so important to the work. Like we're, trying to make those tangible changes, but we actually have to engage people in what we're doing to be able to make it happen. It needs such a broad base of support. And so opportunities like this are so valuable for us, I think, in keeping us inspired, keeping us encouraged, and building the community support that we need for the tangible work.
Here. And maybe we can just say that, connecting the stars and the constellations, so to speak, or connecting the stories there. Megan and I are both involved with some of the folks at Opus. So there's Now Then magazine that is doing some a great series on agency and in worker owned and directed organizations in that community. Foundations Earth is also running some generative inquiries about this sort of thing. So there's developing a small network of, I guess we might call ourselves micromedia or very local media organizations looking to build this story and locate a narrative that's more aligned with the kind of life we want to live. So with that, why don't we turn our attention to you, Lindsay, and what you're up to with Propolis. I understand you're either in the process of raising a community bond or you've got something on the go there. So maybe bring us into what's most alive in your work in the world at the moment, and we'll explore from there.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation to share. So right now, Propolis Cooperative Housing Society, we're based in Kamloops BC, and we've launched a campaign to raise $1.1 million in community bonds to purchase the property for our first affordable net zero housing development here in Kamloops. So we're at such an exciting stage in our journey, but we've got an incredible grassroots group of volunteers that's behind the project. We've been working for 3 years now to bring it to this point. And developing new cooperative housing is such a challenge in our across the country right now, but Kamloops is experiencing a housing crisis, just like so many other communities are, and we really see this vision of bringing more affordable cooperative housing to the community, and we're really thrilled to be offering this community bond opportunity that allows everyday folks in Kamloops or across BC and Ontario is where we're currently on sale for our bonds. So it allows folks who want to make a tangible difference in the housing crisis to actually invest their money. They can earn a financial return and a social return at the same time, knowing exactly what their investment is contributing towards. So I think our organization really has a long-term vision to be developing affordable housing for the next several decades in our community. We're really starting small with the first project, but just waiting to see where it goes from here with a really quite expansive vision.
In the conversations I was having yesterday with folks in Brantford looking for approaches to affordable housing, there was sort of this question about where to start. Do you start with a property, with the build, with the community, with the dream, with the bond? Where is it what's the path to now? What's that path to now been like for what you're doing with Propolis?
Oh, it's such a rich question, and also
not to say that this is the only way, right? It's just one way that happened for here. Yeah,
we have our pathway that we've taken into it, which I'd love to talk more about. But most of the cooperative housing in Canada was built in the 70s and 80s when there was actual higher levels of government investment in cooperative housing at the time, and we've gone generations without that investment, and there's a real knowledge gap, I think, in terms of folks in community who see the cooperative model as having a lot of potential for helping to address the housing crisis, but there's no real easy playbook for making it happen. So in our case, I think that it really started with the people, really started with the champions in the community, me being one of them, but definitely not alone, very much part of a keen group of people who are wanting to make this happen. So I have a background in community economic development. I also work for the Kamloops Food Policy Council, so have a lot of experience, working in the food system, which is its own complex thing, and working on trying to address community food insecurity, and realizing, in doing that work over the last several years, is that, we're just not going to make progress on food insecurity if we can't also address housing costs, and seeing how interconnected those issues were, was really one of the big motivating things for me in saying, like, oh, hey, do we have the ability here to also work on affordable housing at the same time? So there's quite a few people in our organization who kind of came over from that work in the food system, and seeing the interconnections of these social issues and wanting to bring solutions to the table. And then, another real important champion in our organization is my development partner, Miles Pruden, who's the owner of Next Build Construction. And Miles builds innovative net zero building solutions at a really affordable price point. And so being able to to sort of take my dream of wanting to get more cooperative housing in the community and combine that with Miles' passion for building affordable and sustainable buildings, it really seemed very aligned. And that I think that that energy and excitement between those of us who are part of the organizing group of Propolis has really been what's carried us forward so far.
So you've got a lot going on all at once. You got food security, net zero, affordable housing, a cooperative model, plus a community bond.
Plus community bonds, exactly.
Yeah, so I want to go all geeky on some of these structures. What exactly is meant by cooperative housing?
Well, cooperative
some nonprofit housing was based on funding from afar. There wasn't ownership. There wasn't a lot of governance in it. So how is cooperative housing different, and how is it structured?
Yeah, such a great question. The model of cooperative housing is that it's housing that's owned and operated democratically by its members. So, so the nonprofit co-op housing model that we're following, members will purchase a membership. They'll pay a small share price to be able to do that. Right now, for Propolis, that membership share price is set at $2,000. And then once folks move into the building, we don't have a building yet, not quite there yet. We're getting closer.
Right.
and so, once folks move into the building, they pay a monthly housing fee, and they have secure long-term tenancy for as long as they need that home, and they participate, democratically in the way that building operates, and the way that that the organization operates, and so, cooperative housing it has so many strengths. It has the ability to ensure affordability over the long term because it is nonprofit housing. Nobody's profiting from it. Once that building is built, and you cover the operational costs of it, it will stay affordable for the lifetime of the building. So that's obviously a huge strength of the model in terms of affordability. But co-ops also, they bring really great neighbors into a neighborhood. They bring in people who want to put down roots in a neighborhood, who want to belong there for the long term, people who are excited to, participate and volunteer and contribute as part of a living community. And so, it has, co-ops also have that strength of kind of creating the thriving, livable communities that we want to live in.
All right, I would presume that cooperative housing has a track record of staying in the hands of the people who are residents in the homes rather than being sold off to developers and these sorts of things. So they're probably more rooted, grounded, and long-lasting. Is that fair to say, or am I?
That's absolutely fair
reaching?
to say. Yeah.
Okay.
The majority of co-ops, they stay in that realm of being, nonprofit housing that's owned and operated by the members for the long term. That's really the goal.
All right, and then so to raise the money to do the build, you're engaged in this community bond business.
Right. So we're at the stage of property acquisition. So we're raising the funds to purchase our first property. And
do you have a property identified at this point, or what's the relationship between the property and the raising of the bond? Okay, so you have a property identified.
We have a property identified, and so we're raising funds to purchase a specific property. It's located in Kamloops at the corner of Aspen and Tronquil Road. So it's right in the heart of Kamloops North Shore, which is a really wonderful, funky, great vibe neighborhood, and it's super, lots of character, and really walkable neighborhood. So it's a fabulous location for what we're planning. We're planning a 6-story apartment building there. It will have 50 affordable residential units. It'll have commercial space on the ground floor. Right now, the property has an existing commercial building that will have to get torn down when we're ready for redevelopment. But it's currently home to a really fabulous community theater space called the FE Arts Collective. And so we are intending for our commercial space in the new building to have a newly developed space for the community theater to move into. So so it's lots of exciting.
So I see you smiling a bit there, Megan. Is something burbulating for you?
No, I just love that. Like you say, it feels like your values align so much with what you're building. And the idea that where we live isn't just where we sleep and where we eat, it's where we tell stories, it's where we share community, it's where we come together to do things. So I love that you're preserving that heritage, but also like creating that fabric for people, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. We're also planning rooftop gardens because lots of us are, also interested in those aspects of food security.
Boy, how do you get on the waiting list?
Right. We have not opened up memberships yet.
Okay.
For residents in the building. We just need to get a little bit closer to having shovels in the ground for the building. But you can sign up for our mailing list on our website, and that would be the place to go to if you're interested in potential membership in the building in the future.
Well, probably also following the story a bit too, I imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this came up again in the conversation I was part of yesterday, and there were groups of people that were interested in approaches like this. But again, one of the things we were all acknowledging was we just don't have literacy around it. So I don't want to belabor some of these questions because I won't be the only one that has them. You have a property identified. It's going to take some time to raise the funds. How does that work? So one of the concerns that was raised in the conversation I was in yesterday was that, real estate moves very quickly. So there was a concern about, well, we have to have a lock on a property. How do we secure that property while we raise the rest of the money? That sort of thing. What's the structure, the mechanism for your being able to say we've got our eye on one and now we're raising funds for that? So how does that handled?
Yeah, property acquisition can be so challenging, and it's taken us a lot of years, to get to this point where we're actually ready to move on a specific property. One of the things that's making it possible for us is that the current the sellers of the property really believe in our project, and they've been willing to work with us, and so we have a purchase agreement in place with them, and they've been really quite flexible and very accommodating in terms of the completion date for the sale to allow us the time to raise the funds for the property. And that said, we're really acknowledging that, and we're moving as quickly as we can on our capital campaign.
Right. So you're not in this space where there's no chance, and you've got to raise all the $1.1 million in a short period of time to snatch it up. But so you've got some runway, but of course it won't last forever. So you've got plenty of work to do in the meantime. Okay. Well, I think that's important for people to understand.
But we're also we're really excited about the progress that we've made on the community bond campaign. So we launched that campaign in the middle of June. And if you count our pledges and investments, then when we've like passed the halfway mark of the campaign, so that feels like
Since June. Incredible. So you opened in June?
Yeah, we opened in June, and so it feels like really incredible progress. As we're a brand new organization. We're proposing our first project. Community bonds have never been offered in Kamloops before. Co-op housing is new to a lot of people. We're putting the net zero piece into the mix. There's so many, sort of points of education and awareness that we need to get out, in order to bring the community on board with the project. But we've just been so thrilled with the support. We have 47 investors confirmed to this point. And, that degree of community support and excitement for the project is really kind of what keeps us going.
All right. So if I could just be super clear. So you have investors. So these are folks who have invested funds in the community bond.
Right.
And then does the bond then work like a loan?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So
We can maybe
the ownership
talk a little
is
bit
still
about
with the co-op.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the ownership remains with the folks who will take up residence in the co-op, and the bond is a loan. So how do your investors get their money back?
Yeah. So Propolis Cooperative Housing Society, we're the nonprofit co-op that's going to hold the mortgage on the property and hold all the loans. So Propolis is issuing community bonds, and a community bond is an interest-bearing loan. It's very similar to a traditional bond, except in this case, it's issued by a nonprofit co-op, to support our project. And so we have 3 different bond series available. It's a fixed 3-year term for all 3 of those series, and so someone can invest as low as $1,000 and earn 2.5% interest over the 3 years, or someone can invest with our 3rd series. They can invest a minimum of $10,000. They can earn 3.5% interest. So it's a fixed term for 3 years, and at the end of that 3 years, Propolis will repay the bond with the principal and the interest, and folks will be able to say that they've contributed to making something incredible happen in their community, at the same time that they're earning a financial return on their investment.
Okay, so it might sound like a really stupid question, but where does the money come from to pay the investors back?
Right. So it comes from a few different places. So over the
Okay.
next 3 years, over the
Yeah.
next 3 years, we'll be sourcing our financing for the full development, and our intent is for that financing to be sufficient to also repay the bonds. But
I
there's
see.
also the option to run a
So
reinvestment.
based on the asset that now exists, is that the idea?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
So
okay.
so the
Okay.
bond purchases right now will be secured by the value of the property. So that's one of the great things about community bonds is that they're often used to support the purchase of an asset, and
Right.
then that gives the investors more security. So worst case scenario, if we weren't able to move forward with the development project, at the end of the 3 years, we would sell the property and repay the
Right.
investors
Right.
their funds.
Right.
So folks do have that security. Of course, that's the worst case scenario. We really are working so hard to make the project happen, and so we also have we'll have existing revenues from the current commercial tenants in the building while we're waiting for the development. So helps to make it a little bit more sustainable while we're preparing for
All
construction.
right. So the community bond sort of a hump getter over. It's a bridge from here
It's
to there.
absolutely a bridge. Absolutely a
Okay.
bridge.
Okay.
One of the things that I think is so interesting about community bonds is the way that they can play this role. It's such a flexible and nimble type of financing, and so they can really catalyze other investment in the project. So we're in order to do any affordable housing development under the current development constraints that we have, you have to have a really diverse capital stack. You need to get financing and support from all kinds of different sources, and community bonds are such a great starting point for a grassroots or nonprofit organization, because the terms are flexible. We set our own terms, we set our own interest rate that we went out to the community with, and being able to do that up front at the start of a project like this, it really demonstrates the community support for the project. It demonstrates the credibility of our organization and our ability to run a campaign like this successfully, and it's really, I think, part of what's going to bring and attract other financing to the project.
So you really are leading the. It feels like community leadership of a existing system. You're able to pull things that are already in place into new places by sparking some of these. I guess what you were saying earlier, Megan, is that the whole project has an ethos of a certain kind of value. There are certain values at work, and so you're able to make a space that will draw the attention of some of the traditional systemic pieces into place through this provocative piece of community leadership.
Yeah, I think so. I think community-led financing is such a great way to describe what a community bond is, because it, for a lot of people, they're interested in making ethical or local investments, and there's just, there's not a lot available. You walk into your financial advisor's office and you're like, I'd like to do a local investment. I want to see my dollars have an impact on my community. They have, often very little to offer you if you're, just an everyday person wanting to do that. And like, community bonds actually give people that opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise have. They know that their investment is having a huge impact on their community. Those investment dollars are staying local. We're using those investments to build our local economy, to create more affordable housing, where the benefits of investing are coming back to all of us. And I think that that's so incredible. It definitely aligns with the values that we have for creating cooperative housing communities, creating affordable housing. It's just such a way to show community engagement up front in a project.
All right. So what about what's next, and what's the best thing that could happen?
Well, I mean, what's next is the sort of imminent closing the sale on the property, which we are.
How long have you? When's your deadline?
We will keep
birth line. Let's say, when's the birth line? Yeah.
We'll keep the campaign open until we fully sell out.
Okay.
But we hope that will be quick, and I'd love to be sure that we've got the property in hand by this fall. So we're really
Okay.
sort of pushing as hard as we can to get folks to make their commitments. So
All right.
so as soon as we've got the property in hand, then we begin the detailed design process. That's going to be so exciting. We're actually working right now with a group of students from Thompson Rivers University. They're taking a building design class, and they are their assignment for the semester is to draw up designs for the building. So that's a really fun thing that we're excited to see their creativity in that process. But of course, we'll move on, take what we can learn from their ideas, and then move on to our own really detailed design process. And our very, very ambitious target would be to start construction in 2024 and occupancy by 2026. Such an ambitious timeline, and we don't know yet if it will be possible to kind of meet all that, but it's we think that it's worth pushing for an ambitious timeline because we need this housing. We need it now. We need so much more housing in our community, and every day we're hearing stories from people who are struggling with the housing crisis, and I'm like that drive to help those people and help address that problem is really motivating for us.
Well, and the beauty of it is it's actually something within your power to do, and
Yeah.
you're doing it. And I think it's in the power of a lot of people to do. So it's a beautiful story. All right. Anything from you, Megan, you want to ask or probe into?
I mean, I love what you're doing, and I'm also just curious, like how you've maybe had to pitch this, or a lot of it is, as you say, you're looking at an existing system, a finance system, and saying, instead of this being profit extraction led, this is community led, as you described, right? So
Nicely said.
I'm just
Nicely
curious
said.
how you've made that transition and how you've made that pitch, because ultimately a lot of financing is built on the idea of accumulation, right? So how do we
Yeah.
get higher and higher return on money? And the way that lots of that loaning and financing is decided is based on risk, and traditional concepts of risk, again, are more financial. And I'm just curious because I think whenever I've imagined that being done differently, it's about saying, what's the risk of our community being unhoused? What's the risk of our, thinking of changing the risk buckets and the risk factors to being more community based, and also thinking about the return instead of returning profit and accumulation to a higher like group of smaller individuals, the return being coming back to the community. Has that played, like, have you tried to play, how's that played into thinking about how you've made the case? Because I was really curious about the point you made about the owners being up and in believing in your idea. And in some ways I thought that was such an important lever. If they just said, no, we just
Yeah.
this would not be,
Yeah.
would be a non-negotiable. So what was that process like to sell them that idea and that conversation to change?
Yeah, I love the way that you're framing that, Megan, about what's the risk if we don't do this, right? And so as we're talking to people who are considering investing in the project, we're definitely that conversation comes up where you pitch the project to them. They're like, oh wow, this is so exciting, I really want to support it. And then you say, and our highest interest rate is 3.5%, and they say, that's not high enough, or I could get a better interest rate elsewhere. And I'm like, yeah, you could get a better interest rate elsewhere. But
Feel free.
But 3.5% is what's sustainable for this project. And and the reason that people can get higher interest rates elsewhere in other investment opportunities is because we have an economic system that's based on extraction, that's based on exploitation of labor, of the environment, and that's where those higher interest rates are coming from. It's coming from extraction. It's coming from like robbing our future, essentially. And so when we look at what's sustainable for our project, that comes in at 3.5%, and so that's what we're offering. But I think that when people are thinking about earning a financial rate of return, or earning money on their investments, we're trying to say that what we're building is a livable community. The housing crisis actually affects everyone in our community. Whether you're in precarious housing or not, maybe you're in stable housing, but the fact that there's a housing crisis in your community still affects you, because it affects it affects how much inequality is in your community. It affects how safe your community is. It affects your neighbors, and everyone's affected by it. And so being able to tell people, you might not be able to get the best interest rate ever on this investment. I think 3.5% is still a solid return, but it's not the best you're going to get financially speaking. But if you look at it holistically, and if you look at how you benefit from being able to contribute to making your community stronger and making your community more a place that you want to live in, that's why we're trying to earn money on our investments anyway, because we want to have wonderful, thriving lives to live, wonderful places to live in. And you don't achieve that just with a financial return. It has to be this holistic picture of what we actually want to invest in as a community.
A little more developed set of metrics. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Beautiful. Thank you, Lindsay, for sharing your story, and Megan for a great question and some beautiful framing. So that was a wonderful conversation, Lindsay. Thank you very much. We'll take a short break, and then we'll come back, spend a little time exploring what Megan's cooking up. All right. See you in about 90 seconds.
If you would like to experience genuine connection with others, being heard, patience, levity and laughter, warmth, light, smiles, new, deepening, and healing relationships, then cultivate community with us. Coined by participants as a fortnightly feast for the soul, these 90-minute gatherings hosted by Axiom News offer a weaving of small group dialogue led by carefully crafted questions, followed by light, whole group reflection. Each dialogue round deepens connection and enlivens possibility between and amongst those who participate. All are welcome. Learn more and RSVP for our next gathering by visiting the Events tab in A New Commons, our sister initiative in Mighty Networks, at anewcommons.mn.co/events.
All right. Welcome back. Well, Megan, I very much like the way you raised the questions you did, and brought some context into the conversation with Lindsay. And I'm just wondering if maybe I could quit my job and maybe you'd pick it up.
No, morality is what we need.
There you go. There you go. There you go. All right. So you and I have had some conversations, and you've been on quite a path, and you're exploring a variety of possibilities and sensing into where you might want to move. And so maybe, I think I said to you that in many households, when we're cooking stuff up, we put the garlic and the onions in the pan, and then we decide what we're having for dinner. And that seemed to be resonant with you about what you're cooking up. So what ingredients are you working with, and where do you think you're headed with your work in the world at the moment?
Yeah, that's exciting. It's an exciting question. So at the moment, what I'm exploring, pursuing, kind of holding, I guess, is how can we build a collective storytelling future? So the idea of how can we build a future where the information we access, the news we access, the stories, the narratives, the documentation, the histories, the archives, how can information, knowledge, and narrative all be something that is collectively built and collectively owned and collectively shared? this comes from a history of, I've spent the past 12 years in the UK. I've worked at national newspapers. I worked for the Times and the Sunday Times. I worked as a data journalist, as an investigative reporter for the Bureau of Investigative Journalism for the past 5 years. So I've come from a traditional journalism background. I know the power of journalism, but I've also, over the past 5 years, been working on a community grassroots investigative network. And the closer we got to co-creation and reimagining journalism to be, to utilize that power for everyday people, the more I've gotten closer to how like the harm that journalism has created, the harm that it inflicts on a lot of people who see themselves as, scapegoated or harmed. I'm talking about queer communities, Muslim communities, people of color, but just a huge range of even just the narratives around working class people, or just anyone who doesn't fall under that kind of wider remit, but specifically harm for a lot of marginalized communities, I think. And for a lot of people were saying to us, I don't want to read the news. I don't want to see what stories told. I've seen how it's been harmed. I've seen how we've been turned against other people. So I think there's this balance I'm trying to hold between the power that we know knowledge and storytelling could have, and also the harm it currently creates. And I think when we step back and we have a systems view of it, we realize, very similar actually to the conversation we had earlier with Lindsay, a system of extraction. I don't think a lot of people think of that. I think when they think of extraction, they think of like oil drilling, or they think of, very like physical extraction, but really like in a lot of ways, a lot of legacy journalism extracts stories, knowledge, information, packages it and sells it for others to kind of benefit from. So I think this is something about reclaiming and reimagining, and something for me always felt off about it. And so now it's just returning to these more intuitive ways. I mean, the history of storytelling goes back to the beginning of time. People have been telling stories and people have been sharing information for a very long time, but somehow it feels like a little bit we've got kind of caught up in an extractive capitalistic model that takes something that is so deep within all of us, right? We have everything we need within us. We have knowledge, we have intuition, we have ways of communicating. But in some ways that's been sort of taken and, as I say, sold and valued, kind of brought upstream. And so a lot of it is actually just coming back to, how do we enable that storytelling, that information providing within all of us? How do we create the conditions for people to be able to tell the stories they need, share the information they access, but for the world that we're trying to build? So this comes back to that opening conversation, that why we're all here, right? We know that there's a better way of operating, a better and more transformative way of being more aligned with the earth, being more aligned with each other. And I honestly believe that journalism, storytelling, information providing is so integral to that. It's sort of what I've described as like the connective tissue in the body, is between your need to eat and your need to be housed and your need to be in community. I'm trying to imagine how journalism can be a facilitator and a connector of those things, rather than a kind of gatekeeper between those things. And I think that's really where we're at. And so that feels really existential. But we started last year with something called the People's Newsroom. We started first, actually, before that, with a kind of consultative process. We built an advisory group of people from all kinds of backgrounds, from all parts of the UK, journalists, activists, storytellers, community members. We went through a process of identifying that dream future. What do we want that to look like? What are the barriers to getting there? What do we need? And it came up with this manifesto for a People's Newsroom. And the name even was derived from this community, really like wanting a future that brings us hope, information that we can actually use, that gives us solutions, that like generates possibilities, that allows us to be connected. And for that to be created by, for, and with people who are experiencing issues firsthand, and to be done in community. So that was the kind of origin. It was this sort of like reset of connection for the project we were based on, of like, how do we want to make sure we're aligning for the future? And then that's become a kind of a project in of its own, as we've been realizing that, well, to create the conditions for that, we need a new infrastructure, just in the same ways that we create these roads and these infrastructures for getting places, we actually need a strong infrastructure for how do you do this? Because it also comes back to what we said earlier, right? The financing system is designed in a way, a very specific way, and there's a very strong infrastructure. If you want to invest something, if you want to buy bonds in something, if you want, here's a specific way about risk and return. And in the same way, actually, media is like the structures around it are very kind of hard to kind of permeate or build differently. So we're looking to build what is the infrastructure we need to help communities in place tell the stories they need to tell, publish, to distribute, to kind of to cooperatively do that. So we started with the pilot last year, where we were based in Swansea with the Ethnic Youth Minority Support Team. They work with people on frontline, accessing all kinds of different services, from refugee and immigration services to just sort of, other kind of basic needs. But they would have so many stories that were coming out of it. They wanted to tell those stories. So we did sort of a pilot with them, an invitation of kind of young people coming together, providing that kind of world building, dreaming element, all the way through to supporting them to understand and have the skills to be able to tell their own story. And we realized that when you lead first with people who've been kind of most harmed by a space, what would happen if the very mechanism or institution that has created that harm, what if we supported people to reimagine it and reclaim it? There's different ways of, pushing it back against harmful institutions, but I think there is a way of doing it where you build something new. But with anything, the kind of analogy of like burning it down, there are still ashes there, right? We're still rebuilding on top of that. You still need to use that. And so it's kind of like, what are the essence of that we need to build for the next? So we were doing all that, and it's just kind of grown even further. So now we're building we're going to bring together a series. We're going to start this like next run of it, beginning of next year, the end of this year, beginning of next year, where we've kind of invited in the UK different community organizations. So you're not kind of inviting traditional journalism institutions, but community organizations doing the work, doing deep listening, doing great service work, but want to tell stories or want to be thinking about how their information is distributed, bringing an end community together for us to co-learn and co-create the skills, knowledge, and means and the infrastructure that we would need to make sure that can happen. So we're at the very beginning stages. How do you co-create an infrastructure for a future world of information and journalism? And one of the exciting things that we're doing as well is imagining what would that look like as a commons. So rather than I produce my stories for my site, I produce my stories for my site, the thought that any act of creation is biased for us. How is it that the stories and the knowledge that we create could also be shared with others? So if you think of when you think about collectives or commons of like a field or a piece of land or something, like everyone's cultivating it and all of those crops are shared. It's a little bit more existential, but I guess we're trying to explore what would that look like for stories and information? What would it look like if we're all collectively creating more knowledge or more information, and that's something that's sort of shared within us? So we're still at the very early stages of imagining what that can look like, but that beginning foundation is bringing a series of groups together, creating that sort of shared collective container, figuring out what are the skills and knowledge we need. So in that same analogy of the field, like what is the kind of soil that we need? How do we tend the crops? What are the kind of tools we need to do that? How can we all be using and sharing that together? And then we'll be figuring out also how do we actually like share the knowledge and stories.
I think there's some very interesting potential in bringing like-minded organizations, which are communities unto themselves, who are working on the kinds of things that you and Lindsay are interested in and that I'm interested in, and them together deciding how to build an architecture, where to find possibly some in the language of the commons. Eleanor Ostrom saw that there were what she called regular producers. So in many commons, there were folks that were to some degree responsible for keeping some minimum viable activities going in order that other members of the commons and co-producers could opt in to play and engage in the ways that suited them. So I think there's some really interesting potential in finding a way to bring communities and organizations together to collaboratively build that architecture and continuously produce good news while inviting people into the process of sensing into and even creating it themselves. This would really shift how news is directed, what it pays attention to, and who owns it. I think that's that could be a tremendous shift.
The aim at the end of the day is that everything that we create is a valuable piece that's being shared. I think you think very differently about it. A lot of the models that currently now are like creating content for extraction, for clicks, for profit, for aim. You know, what is the thing that's going to get the most people to click, to get the most advertising dollars and eyes? But if you shifted that, it was like, well, what if you really stopped and thought, like, what is the information and stories we actually need? Because there is a lot of people talk about an information overload right now, and there's too much information. But the truth is that there's only too much information for people who already exist and have power and have means. There's very little information out there, or stories that are saying, if you're struggling with or about to be evicted, what is the information you need? If you're trying to access food, what is it that you know? There's so many people that are struggling, and there's an information deficit for a huge swath of people. But there's an information overload for supporting existing status quo or those who are in power. But I think if you imagine it as like, what are the things that we need that healthy community crop, I suppose, of information, it's different. And as you say, it's very building the infrastructure first from like, what do we need as a series of community organizations, as opposed to like, what's the infrastructure you need to mass produce or mass changes, I think, the way it changes the product, it changes the crop, it changes the stories. But it is difficult. Like I'm sure Lindsay weigh in on this as well, that like trying to use existing mechanisms, but coming at them from different frames and also trying to like unlearn or approach it from a different way is really hard to do when you're surrounded constantly all the time by it. I struggle personally with it. When you work in reimagining the media, when the media is around you all the time, you can't escape every social media app on your phone or everything. Like when that's the dominant system, how much time people spend on their phones or spend on their computers or spend accessing some form of content, that is such a dominant system to try to underweave, I guess.
Well, I think there's something you said, Megan, about like in our generative journalism community practice just this week, we were talking about this question of clicks and numbers and social proofing. So the things that get the most traffic continue to climb, and this is if we don't have those numbers, we become insecure. However, what happens in the interview or as a result of a story in community, even if it were 2 or 3 people participating in it, if that causes a generative shift, that's more important than all the clicks in the world. So just to shift the purpose of the interview and the purpose of the news and the purpose of the stories, like you said, there isn't information. This is why I'm so interested in really working into the kinds of things you're talking about, Lindsay, because we just don't have that kind of information. Like there are so many members of communities around the world looking at each other going, what can we do? And the systems that we are familiar with aren't helpful, but we don't have these kinds of stories at our disposal and right before us to show us the way that we could actually do these things.
I also think there are so many people doing the work, we just don't always know about it as well. That's why, to me, an infrastructure that allows, like, scale is important to me also to some degree, because I do know every place you go, there are people doing the work. They just it's maybe under a different name. There are people rewriting local histories or community histories, doing kind of documenting or archiving projects. There's people that are like, in the hairdressers, they're talking, they're sharing information, they're telling, there is a constant state of people trying to navigate around some of those barriers. And there are amazing people that are just working. How can we build something new? Like I love,
and some kind of architecture is necessary to hold it. Some kind of structure, some kind of some patterns, some skills, some conceptual frameworks. Absolutely.
And I think most people want that. I think I speak to a lot of people within my family or friends. People don't read the news anymore because they say it's depressing, and they don't know what to do about it. I've heard someone sort of describe it as like basically you've been taken out into the desert and dropped off into this brutal, hot, difficult desert and just left there, right? And I think this is, Peter, I think you've like illustrated this many times of like, what do we do next? Nobody wants to go on that journey. No one wants to know that if you read that story, you're going to go down this horrible road. You're going to experience and be presented with a lot of trauma, a lot of problems, a lot of conflict. And then you're just going to be left there at the end, not knowing what to do about it, not to do with yourself, or not how to navigate out of it. And so I think there's such an important need for more constructive, more generative journalism that thinks not just about a traditional news story that's or upside down pyramid, but actually like, what do people need? What do people need from this? And it does come back to our conversation we had with Lindsay earlier about metrics, and about what does success look like, and actually if we stopped and just said like, what would success look like for us if you're, okay, the housing crisis, if you're going to report on the housing crisis, what do people actually want and need out of that information? What do we need at the end of it? Where do we need to be sent to afterwards? And how can we be connected to others? And I think oftentimes,
and what I'm finding was interesting about that is that it's not, the information isn't necessarily available locally. Like your story, Lindsay, and like you said in Kamloops, so far no one's done this. So I imagine that you heard about this from away. So it's not that you're importing a best practice, but you're learning from other communities. So this connecting communities as a function of constructive or generative journalism is also part of the architecture. So one thing I'm learning today is that in conversations like this, an hour does not seem to be anywhere near enough. So why don't we'll just we'll bring us all three back into the big circle, I guess, and why don't we just do a bit of a checkout on what's alive for us, or what's struck us about the time we've spent together. I mean, number one for me is I would just like to keep on going. So I guess another visit would be a wonderful proposition. Lindsay, what's alive for you, or what struck you about our time together?
So much. I think really, the thread of building the commons seems like it weaves through all of our work. And I'm like, we need to invest in the commons. We need to rebuild that. And there's so many different ways that we can do that. And taking that as a theme feels like a really good takeaway for me.
Beautiful, thank you. Megan, a last word or two?
Totally agree with Lindsay. I think it's there. I think the energy is there. I think every time you tell somebody about it, like people just, there's something that like pulls them to it because there's something so intuitive. But yeah, I think there's also this, I think Lindsay's kind of also reminded me about the balance that we need between how do we work with what we have now, but also build something very new or something very old, something very old. Commons is a very old model. And so I think having an appreciation for any and different avenue and any different role that people can play to open those doors. Like not everybody is going to be a Lindsay who could actually wrestle with these financial models, but you could be a property owner who says, you know what, I'm going to allow the sale of this property to go for community ownership. Like just even playing that role in the system is really important. Shifting power or building new things, like having all of those pieces are integral to this future we're trying to build.
I have to wonder, Lindsay, how has the media in Kamloops been? Are they picking up on the story? I'm also wondering, maybe the folks that you're looking to purchase the property from might be interested in joining us here to get some more of the story out. What's the narrative?
Yeah, for sure. I think I feel
field
really
been like?
grateful to live in Kamloops, which I think has a fairly robust local ecosystem for media
Awesome.
and
Awesome.
for storytellers. You know, we've got some great folks here who are trying to do, you know, similar to what you're doing, Megan, try to tell stories in a different way. And we've benefited from that as an organization, with those people really supporting us to get the word of our story out to the community.
Beautiful. That's great to hear. That's great to hear. All right, friends. Well, with that, we'll have to call our time for today complete and closed. Thank you very much, Lindsay and Megan, for coming out to play. It's been an absolutely beautiful conversation. As I said, I would love to just keep on running with this. So hopefully we can reconvene sometime and check in again and see what's unfolding. So thank you both very much for the work you're doing in the world and for joining us and for creating for all of us the world we wish to inhabit. It's a pleasure being with you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. With that, our time together is closed. You can join us again next week for what I'm sure will be another riveting show on Thursday at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, I guess, and 7 o'clock in the UK. In the meantime, you can subscribe below, or you can find us at axiomnews.com on Facebook and X. For now, that's our show. I'm your host, Peter Pula. Thanks for listening.